Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Your English is always going to be so much better than my non-existent Norwegian, so I'm going to stick to English, so bear with me. The good news is there are only like 9 slides. The not so good news is some of the slides need me to go to the internet, so fingers crossed, hopefully everything works. What I wanted to do very quickly, about 20 minutes or so, was to just talk about a few issues that are confronting the news publishing business, both from the business side of the publishers as well as newsrooms. Some of these will be fairly obvious issues that all of us have been dealing with, but have consequences today and going forward. For a digital event and talking about the digital future, it might seem a little odd that I'm beginning with this idea that print isn't going away. I'm not saying this because I'm from News Corp and we publish probably about 120 newspapers around the world. I'm saying this because I think most of us in this business 5 or 10 years ago probably thought that digital revenue and digital audiences are going to grow this way, print is going to come down, and at some point the lines will cross and we'll all be in happy digital land. And most of us have realized that that's not going to happen. Whether we think print is going to be around for 10 years, 20 years, or whatever, the reality is that print isn't going away. That has, if you're on the business side, that has significant implications in terms of how much resources you can allocate to digital and how much you have to continue to invest in print. And if you're on the newsroom side, if you're an editor, obviously you cannot divert a lot of your news staff to purely digital issues because print continues to, depending on the media company, be 40 to 60 to 70% of our revenue, and in a good year, profits. So when oftentimes people compare a traditional mainstream brand like the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal to somebody like BuzzFeed or Business Insider or Huffington Post and ask us, why is it that you don't seem to move as quickly? The real reality is that we can't be all in on digital because we have to make sure that our print assets and our print newsroom and our print resources continue to be supported. So there's an interesting challenge for us even over the next 5, 10, 15 years where we all know our audiences are going to be increasingly digital, but we are in this awkward situation of having to put a lot of resources to support our print products. And people like me think that print is going to be around for a much longer time than it's given. So it's, I think, important to kind of balance the resource issues. As I said, I think 10 years ago, again, most of us thought if we only grew our digital audience, we will make a lot of money from them and we'll be fine. But the reality is that we are discovering that digital advertising isn't really going to kind of save us in an existential sense, simply because the supply of journalism, the supply of news on the web is fairly infinite. Again, 5, 10 years ago, there was no BuzzFeed, there was no Business Insider, there was no Quartz, there was no Huffington Post. And as we speak, newer digital ventures are coming. So just because we are growing audiences doesn't mean that we are able to make more money from them. And this is our reality because CPMs continue to fall fairly regularly. I'll give you a couple of, I'll just give you an example of what are the implications for that. The implications for that are that we grew up thinking in a very newspaper world that we'll have content on one side, we'll have advertising on the right rail, and we'll monetize that. But increasingly, we are finding that the value of that advertising continues to diminish. We're not able to get as much money as we can, even though we have a large audiences. What that increasingly means is that these kind of news experiences, this is from Time Magazine, are having to actually create a lot of advertising that is now part of the news reading experience. This is a way that we are trying to deal with in terms of trying to create more value with our advertising, trying to get more attention. So this is an example of a very compelling piece of journalism, but it has very strong embedded, as you can see, it's an ad for Chivas Regal. It's very strongly embedded. And increasingly, advertising is moving from its corner, from its right rail ghetto into content. And this is a reality that whether some of us who are in the newsroom, like it or not, we have to live with, because this is the only way you are able to kind of generate more revenue than you would otherwise. So this integration of advertising and journalism, and again, clearly labeled and with all the rules that we have, is going to be more and more prevalent. You're going to see a lot more of it. The idea that advertising is separate from our content is starting to already kind of fray at the edges, but it's going to fray even more as we go forward. One of the results of advertising not growing is paywalls. You're starting to see a lot of them, especially in the US. There are now about probably 500 to 550 newspapers in the US that have created paywalls. But I am of the belief that paywalls are good and will probably generate an interesting source of revenue, but I don't think they're going to really solve our issues, simply because the amount of money that you will raise from a paywall is always going to be fairly finite. There have been studies this past week that showed that if you have a metered wall, chances that you will get more than 5% of your visitors to pay are pretty slim. The nice thing is it does add a source of revenue that is not dependent on the economy, that is not dependent on advertising, that's really stable. But the downside is that this alone is not going to really solve our problem. Some of the more innovative media companies are not just satisfied by creating a paywall and expecting that to solve our problem. They're trying to innovate on the paywall itself, and I'll give you a couple of examples. The first one is the FT, which actually does a very interesting thing where they charge a premium. They have a premium paywall. All they do is they have a little bit more content, but because a lot of their customers tend to be companies, executives who don't mind paying £100 or $100 more, they charge a significantly higher amount for a little bit more content. So they are innovating off the paywall itself. The point here is that those of you who are doing paywalls for the last few years, that is not the end in itself. It's good to have one, but there are limitations on how much we can grow. So it's interesting and important, I think about what can we do, how can we evolve the paywall. And one of the better examples of this is the New York Times, which has done some interesting things just in the last couple of months, actually. They've started the NYT now, which is essentially a very light, almost mobile-based paywall. For about $9, you can get a curated version of the New York Times. So they're really taking the paywall and going at a lower price to attract people who may not be willing to pay for a lot of it. But they also did something very interesting where they created this thing called Times Premiere, which adds like almost $10 more to the paywall and offers a lot more. It takes readers inside the newsroom. And again, you've heard the New York Times is the most successful non-business paywall out there, and it is. Probably about 800,000 subscribers, 150, 160 million in annual revenue, which wasn't there 4 years ago. But they're very smartly thinking about what is next and saying, can we take the paywall low for people who are willing to pay a little less, and can we take the paywall higher for people who are willing to pay a little bit more? So as those of you worry about what is happening to our industry, I think it's important not just to start a paywall and then kind of stick to it, but to try to figure out ways to experiment with it. Again, nothing new to all of us. We are finding that as audiences, especially younger audiences, stay in Twitter, stay in YouTube, or stay in Facebook, we are increasingly having to take our content to them. But this poses a very interesting problem both for our newsroom and for the business side. For the business side, the problem is very simple. When people were coming to us, coming to our website, we have trouble making money. You can imagine the challenges we have when we have to go where they are and try to make money, because it's very hard to make money on Facebook or Twitter or elsewhere with our content. But the reality is that's where the readers are going to be, and that's where we have to go. For the newsroom, I think it's important to think in terms of how do we create compelling, interesting journalism that travels. And the unfortunate part here, and the example I want to give you is actually from Facebook, which created this amazing mobile experience called The Paper. I don't know how many of you use it. But here is a great example of somebody like Facebook. 1.3 billion people are users of Facebook. They still force themselves to think about what happens if people don't come to Facebook. It's not a problem they're having. they're anticipating in the future. And again, our industry hasn't done a good job about kind of saying, I'm getting the audiences to my printed paper, I'm getting the audiences to my web. What if they don't come? Can we create a compelling experience? This is a pretty amazing experience from Facebook. And it is unfortunate that it's Facebook that's creating it, and it's not publishers who are doing it, because we have the journalism, we have the images, we have the stories, but we are, again, abandoning this to companies like Facebook, and it's going to be an interesting challenge. So again, as we think about where our content and our journalism is going to be consumed, it's really important for us to kind of think in terms of creating new offerings that can go to readers and give them compelling journalism, our journalism, than kind of lose out to people like Facebook who are actually investing a lot in this. The other trend, again, a lot of you know this, web video, there's a reason why web video is becoming more and more prevalent. One is that our readers seem to want to actually consume it. A lot of readers seem to want to read stories, watch video, so which is a very good problem to have. The second reason why video is becoming more and more important is, for the first time in many years, web video is a form of journalism that we've created where the business model actually travels with the journalism. So at the Wall Street Journal, we have the video brand, it's called WSJ Live. You can watch WSJ Live on 32 platforms, Hulu, Xbox, Roku, Apple TV. Wherever you can watch news video, you can watch WSJ Live video. The reason to do that was simply because wherever you watch it, the advertising in front of it, the pre-roll in front of it, the 7 seconds or 15 seconds commercials that you see, are sold by the Wall Street Journal. So the business model is traveling to wherever the readers are watching WSJ Live. Sure, we split the revenue with a Hulu or an Xbox or a Roku, but this was revenue, this was audience that would have never come to the Wall Street Journal to consume that video. So it's all incremental, even though we are sharing some revenue. This is the reason why I think in video, a lot of us have a pretty significant opportunity to kind of monetize our journalism and monetize it well. Again, because there's a lot of pressure on advertising agencies and brands to switch some money out of television, because television still has about 40% of all ad spending. Some of the money is very relatively easily moving to publishers who have good web video. So this is the reason why I think web video is going to be strong for several more years. And it's a big opportunity for us, both for our journalism, because readers want it, but also from our business model. Again, the prices we can charge on web video is significantly higher than prices that we can charge on traditional advertising. But even here, there is actually significant competition coming. I don't know how many of you know a company called Vice, which really does some amazing video. It's a web-only based company, does great video. But the interesting thing about Vice is that they have turned the ability to create good video into a business model. They have this Creators Project, which is backed by Intel, and I think Intel is spending like $50 million or something like that, and they create really compelling video. There is, again, no reason why we can't take our journalism creation strengths that we have and create good video and find opportunities to find sponsors. I mean, $50 million from Intel to Vice, a company that, just by its name, is not a company that you would think Intel would want to do anything with, right? It is Vice. It's all the bad things in life. But the reality is, Intel loves their video, and they create very compelling video. They attract young people, and that's the reason why. So again, a good opportunity for us in traditional publishing to create compelling video, find partnerships, and then find the right audiences. Again, nothing new to all of us. Mobile is becoming a reality. About 3 years ago, less than maybe 5% of the Wall Street Journal's digital audience was on mobile. As of last month, 40% of Wall Street Journal's digital audience only consumes the Wall Street Journal on a 3 to 7-inch device. And next year or a year from now, 50% of our audiences are going to be on mobile, especially younger audiences. I think as publishers, we have spent a lot of energy on tablets because we can easily see translating the paper experience onto the tablet, but a lot of us are not spending enough energy on the phone part of it. Again, an example that I want to give you is a company in the US, some of you may know this, called Circa, which is just it's a startup, it's a mobile-based, phone-based company, does some really amazing experiences where you can follow stories you're interested in on the phone, and every time there's an update, it tells you there's an update, and you go and just get the update. Again, no reason why, as big publishers, as News Corp, as the New York Times, as Shipstead, you name it, why we haven't invented these formats, because we have the content. Circa doesn't have any content, actually, just an amazing, they do, I mean, they curate, but they don't have traditional journalism creation strengths. So if we think, and I think it is a reality that a lot of us are going to live our lives on mobile phones, it's really important for us to create these kind of products that take our journalism and kind of make it available to people who want to consume it on phones. Again, allowing, it is not very dissimilar to how we allowed Googles of the world to take over our business in a lot of areas. Unless we pay attention, these companies are going to take over our audiences in mobile. And that's going to be pretty fatal for us, because especially young people will only consume most of what we do on mobile. So mobile remains a very compelling opportunity. We are struggling to make advertising money on it because we haven't innovated with advertising on mobile. Again, we have left that up to the ad companies. There's no reason why publishers are not creating great mobile advertising innovation as well. So it's a bit of an opportunity, but also a significant threat if we continue to kind of ignore it. I have a premise that not everybody agrees with me, which is, up until recently, we thought if we had great journalism, if you created exclusive stories, you had great analysis, you have wonderful columnists, that we're going to win this battle. That was true up until recently, when the competition took time to catch up with us. So in the print world, if you had an exclusive story, the competition would have it only the next morning, right? Because that's the only time they could follow you. In the desktop world, that shrank to a few hours. You had a great story. It'll take somebody else 2-3 hours to put together somewhat of the same story and publish it. But with social media, with Twitter, and with all these other social media tools that are available, the advantage we have in unique journalism has really shrunk to minutes. By that, I mean you may have a really great story. You may have an exclusive story, but 5 minutes after you put it out, there'll be a lot of people, with the simple act of retweeting your headline or adding something to it, are starting to draw away audiences from you. So the advantage we had, if we only had great content, has now shrunk to literally minutes. So I have a belief that to be successful, our newsrooms will have to pivot from creating only great content to creating really great experiences with that content. I'll give you a simple example of that. This is from our paper in Australia. It's called The Cinderella Man. This is about this guy in Australia who wants to kind of win the world heavyweight boxing championship. Those of you may have heard of something called the Snowfall, which the New York Times did almost 2 years ago, which was a very compelling experience. But these kind of experiences are increasingly becoming very common, where the idea of, so this story would have been a great story, but there was nothing competitive about it in the sense that there was nothing exclusive about it. Anybody else could have done it. But if you create a compelling experience that looks something like this, where as you're reading, and there's volume, by the way, I've just turned it off, and as you're scrolling down, it goes up there, and you can find, there's advertising in there, obviously. You can see big pull-out quotes. You can just read the story. It's a much more interesting, compelling experience. The images are embedded as part of your reading experience. It's not something that's sitting on the side. Again, as you scroll down, the video starts playing. As you scroll out of the screen, it'll stop. You have embedded, again, very amazing pictures. Stories scroll on, continue there, and then I'll just stop. And then really good graphics, again, part of the story experience itself. So this experience is unique, proprietary. So no matter what somebody does, no matter if another paper starts writing about the same guy, because of the experience you have created, you can still engage, you can still retain loyalty because the experience remains proprietary. So I think it's important for newsrooms to kind of start thinking about, I have great journalism, but what do I do with this journalism? Can I create a compelling experience that will bring people back to me and not go somewhere else if somebody copies, somebody curates, somebody aggregates my story? The good news and the bad news is that creating experiences, unfortunately, doesn't just happen in the newsroom. You have to bring your journalists and your developers, your software writers, and your coders together. And most of us have spent a lot of energy in combining our print and online newsrooms, and we thought that that was a big challenge, and we really struggled with it. Try combining your technology teams and your newsrooms. It is a really, really profound challenge because these two people speak different languages almost. They usually are in separate floors. They quite don't understand each other. If you talk to a journalist, they think that the words, the photography, and the editing is the art, and everything else is kind of stuff. If you talk to a developer, they think that the software is the art, and the words and the pictures and everything else is stuff. So these two people really live in very different planets and have very different worldviews. And trying to get them together to work on projects is a pretty difficult challenge, but one that we have to all embrace, both from a business side, from your CTO and the CTO putting resources into the newsroom, and from the newsroom willing to kind of say, journalism is great, but unless I create a great experience with this journalism, I may not have the right audience. So I think this is going to be a big challenge, both culturally, physically, because they sit in separate places in most places, organizationally, and just from a mindset point of view. So over the next 2-3 years, you will see the successful newsroom, successful news organizations being able to do this well and create really compelling experiences. And there is also just a couple of examples. There are companies now, free ad for the New York Times here. There are companies now, which are startup media companies, that are actually taking this ability to bring their journalists and their technologists together to create fairly unique kind of selling experiences. Vox Media, which recently hired this very famous blogger at the Washington Post called Ezra Klein to create a new company, is a great example of it. And the New York Times wrote this story about how they're melding journalism and technology to a new level. And here is an example of what they're doing. Essentially taking a CMS and creating a very interesting kind of journalism approach that has a blend of, very easy to use blend of journalism, technology behind it, and kind of make it all a very seamless experience. Most of us, again, this is a very visual story just to illustrate how easy it is for them to drag and drop these things into a single story, which most of us who work in newsrooms know it's very hard to create these kind of experiences in a seamless way, because we all have a CMS that is very difficult to work for. It's not easy to change. Most of the newsroom complains that the CMS is the worst thing they've ever dealt with. But here is a company that is actually taking the publishing system, taking a CMS, and turning it into an advantage, being able to hire the right people because they want to work at this company because there's flexibility. And there's no reason why some of us who work for big media companies don't kind of think of our CMS as not just a problem which causes a lot of headache in the newsrooms, to something that can be more nimble and interesting and a kind of an opportunity as well. And then I'll end with this slide. One of the biggest challenges that we are facing, and which can be an opportunity or a threat depending on how you do things, is this whole idea of those who were advertising with us, the big advertisers, the General Electrics, the IBMs, and the Pepsis, starting to think in terms of creating their own content. You call it native advertising, you call it branded content, different names for it. It's starting to be pretty big in the US. I have very little doubt it'll be here. It's essentially an advertiser who used to think that the only way they can reach audiences is by coming through a media company. But now, thanks to social media, thanks to our reading behaviors, they're discovering that they can actually find this audience on their own, and what they're trying to do is create compelling content. There is some confusion in the minds of a lot of newsrooms that brands are trying to get into the news business. They actually don't want to be in the news business, but they want to be in the storytelling business, and they can tell pretty compelling stories. We have a great opportunity as publishers, because we've been doing this for a long, long time, and we know how to engage our readers, to take these skills and kind of work with advertisers to turn them from competition, really, which doesn't want to advertise with us, into folks who are willing to work with us. I'll give you a couple of examples again here. This is BuzzFeed. You've all heard of BuzzFeed. Yeah, there you go. They create a lot of lists. They're very big, they're very popular. But one of the things they do very well is that they take their journalism, which is called listicles, but they also create similar listicles for brands. This is HBO show called Game of Thrones, very popular, very brutal, ugly, dark show. A lot of people die. But they've done some very interesting things where it's basically a paid promotion for Game of Thrones, but they've done it in a very journalistic way where they say, how would you die in a Game of Thrones? And you get to pick your character. And if you pick one of these characters, then it'll take you through various steps. And then, because everybody dies in the Game of Thrones, so they make it a game where you pick a character and then they tell you how you're going to die, which brutal form. But trust me, this is a very engaging thing for a lot of audiences interested in this show. You can imagine that if they had come to one of us, big publishers, we'd have said, ad here, maybe an embedded video, but that's it, right? It would have been a very traditional way. And here are BuzzFeed, these guys, and every one of these is shareable, by the way. So you can share each piece of this. And they get a lot of money for this. But there's very little reason why we leave it to the BuzzFeeds of the world to create this kind of compelling engagement. I understand our reluctance to work. Our newsrooms especially are very, very worried about whether we will cheat our readers, whether we confuse them. And my answer to that has always been, you come up with the rules, you come up with what you want to call it, how transparent you want to be, and what you want to label it. But the reality is, a significant amount of money that HBO spends is moving away from the traditional brands to these kind of experiences. And if we as publishers don't offer them these experiences, this money is never going to be available to us from an advertising point of view. And a lot of people say, well, BuzzFeed, they can do it, but I am, big brand. I can't do this because, I'm a very traditional brand, very trusted, very respected. So the good news there is that there are answers to that, right? So there are companies now, again, going back to Vox, which actually is taking this whole idea and then offering it to the advertisers and creating something. The New York Times has done some really amazing stuff. They call it paid post, very clearly labeled. They've done some very amazing, interesting work with advertisers. And if the New York Times can do it, I don't think any of us can say they're somehow our brand is holier than theirs, right? Because the New York Times has been around for a long time, cares deeply about the brand. This is just a video that I want to quickly play. It's only 30 seconds. But the idea, again, is what we think of as a problem, which is native advertising. Here are companies that are actually trying to kind of say, we have a great CMS, we have a good way to put it together, and going to brands and saying, we can solve your problems. And I think that's the mentality that big publishers need to embrace. Otherwise, we're going to start losing money to this. So I'm going to see if this ought to work.
At Vox Media, we're building a media and technology company to give the web the voice it deserves. Award-winning design, broadcast quality video, deep community, and world-renowned journalism. All delivered by proprietary publishing technology. This is how we tell thousands of stories to millions of people every day. Now, those same capabilities can be yours, because brands have a story to tell too. Introducing Vox Creative. Our expertise, your stories.
Again, no reason why a big publishing company is not able to do this, because we have great stories, we can tell great stories, we can publish things, we have large audiences, we can engage them. No reason why we are not able to kind of take this together and kind of offer it to brands if they want to tell stories. And again, do it at our own terms, without cheating our readers, being transparent about it. So I think it's important for us to kind of take some of our skills that we have and think of it differently as some of these smaller companies are doing. I did say 10 slides, so I'm going to end here. The nice thing about the future is that it is in the future. So somebody like me can come up here and say, these are the things that might happen, and I go away a year from now, you'll forget what I said. But the bad thing about the future is that it doesn't come with a sign. It doesn't say it's coming, so you're prepared for it. It just happens. One day we all wake up and something had changed, and that's the reality of us. So I think most of us tend to spend a lot of energy on today's problems because these are big problems and we're trying to solve them. But it's also important, especially for those of you on the business side of it, or those of you who are running newsrooms, to ask yourself, who is it in our team who's actually thinking about what's coming next? And are we kind of worried enough about it? And are we dealing with enough of these problems? Because the future is going to be here, whether we like it or not. And those of us who are slightly better prepared for it probably have a chance of dealing with it better. So ask yourself, if you're a publisher, ask yourself if you're an editor, who in my team is actually spending some amount of their time not just worrying about today's problems, but also kind of thinking about what's coming. Because some of the most successful companies, especially folks like Facebook, are not just looking at today and saying, we have 1.3 billion people, audiences, we can grow, we're making a lot of money, but they're actively creating things for the future. And I think our industry has really struggled to kind of deal with this, even though we kind of know. We tend to complain a lot after the fact, but we tend to kind of run and try to fix things after the fact, but I don't think we're being very proactive at all. I don't mean to be kind of depressed about all this, because I do think that what we have is a product that people really want to consume. There have never been more consumers or readers or audiences for news since the invention of the Gutenberg press. They've just been, take the Wall Street Journal, for example. At its peak, whenever you call its peak, it probably had about 2.5 million readers in print, right? Assuming every reader read every copy of the paper. Last month, it had 65 million unique readers on its websites. So we've never had more people consuming what we produce. So it's a great problem to have. Our challenge is to kind of figure out the business model, obviously, but at least we are making something that more and more people want to consume. And for that sense, I think we have a pretty bright future if only we pay more attention to it now. Thank you. We have time, so I'm happy to take any and all questions. I was warned that in Norway the questions come a little slowly, so don't worry if nobody's hand goes up. So I'll keep talking like this till somebody's hand goes up. Any questions? I'm happy to answer. There's one here. If you could tell me who you are and what you do, that will help as well.
Hello?
Yes.
I work for the Danish Union of Journalists. And one thing that I hear a lot about is content marketing, which you also mentioned. How much will that sort of conquer traditional newspapers and digital newspapers in the future, do you think? And is it good or bad?
Yeah, so as you probably deduced from my talk about it, I don't think it's something that we should run away from. For the simple reason that a lot of advertisers are saying that I don't have new ad budgets, I have the same fixed budget, but by the way, I have a lot of money for you to help me with content marketing. So it's up to us to say whether we want to engage in that or not. The fear has been, and I think it's a rightful fear, especially in our newsrooms, that somehow this is aimed at confusing our readers, and this is trying to kind of pass off branded stuff as journalism. Right? I think some of it is a very genuine fear, but if you talk to most brands, they really, really don't want to be in the news business. In fact, they want to stay away from the news business because they can't control the news business. One day it could be a plane crash, someday it could be a happy story. But what they do think is that they have stories to tell. And the reason for us to care is twofold. One is, as I talked about, advertising dollars are moving. It's not a big number yet. In the US, I think the estimates are maybe, eMarketer estimates it's going to be about $3 billion this year. It's not a big number, but the growth has been pretty dramatic. So I do think that more brands will want to kind of put more money into creating their own content and look to us to distribute that content or to kind of engage audiences. But the bigger fear, and here is why newsrooms need to worry about it, is that at the end of the day, we are not competing with each other in some ways, right? I mean, if I'm the Wall Street Journal, my competition isn't really the New York Times or the Financial Times or the Huffington Post or the Guardian. The thing that I'm really competing for is the one single non-renewable resource. I repeat that, the one single non-renewable resource of our readers, which is their time. So if I can get more of their time, how I monetize that is my problem. But I can win that battle. If I get less of their time, then I have a problem. And increasingly, our readers are finding very compelling content from brands. So when a guy called Richard Baumgartner jumps out of space, and Red Bull has that live on YouTube, and millions of people watch it for like hours to make sure that he is landing okay, that is time those people would have probably spent on traditional media. That's time that's gone forever. So if I was a journalist, I would be very worried about losing audiences to compelling stories from the General Electrics, the IBMs, and the Pepsis. So it's for that reason I think we need to pay attention to it. Again, I think that content marketing has to be done at our terms. It has to be very clearly labeled. It has to be transparent. There's no reason why we ought not to engage in it. The other thing I add is if you're coming out of journalism schools, it is going to be a pretty significant source of jobs, because a lot of these companies are creating what they call newsrooms, right? We can argue with them about the name of that. But the reality is they're hiring a lot of people who can write, edit, create video, and tell stories. So you're going to find a lot of journalists ending up in those roles for brands. And so there's no reason to you can take a holier-than-thou attitude and say, that's not what I want to get into this business for. But if you're a great, compelling storyteller, and you can create a great multimedia package, it's very engaging, no reason why you can't work for a General Electric doing that. So I spent 24 years out of my 25 years on the news side. So this isn't like some corporate guy talking about all this stuff. I do come from a news background.
So nice listening to you. I'm head of social media for the Norwegian Broadcasting Corporation, a public service broadcaster. You talk about creating shareable content, meeting the audience where they are through social media. What importance would you place on interacting and engaging that audience and building a relationship with your audience online?
I think online and social media does allow us to engage with each of the readers individually, which we as an industry haven't. We talk a good talk about readers, but we haven't really paid much attention to them, right? Because as an industry, we were built around acting as gatekeepers. By that I mean 5 or 6 of us would walk into a morning news meeting in the old days and decide what 5 stories we want to put in tomorrow morning's front page. So we were deciding for them because we thought we were this great, amazing wisdom. From there, we've gone to being able to find out what our readers want, what they care about, what they're reading and not reading. And most newsrooms have had a hard time kind of dealing with the data. We have a hard time going from being gatekeepers to gate openers, if you will, where we are telling our audience, we will show you a lot of interesting things, and we'll guide you as a trusted source. So I do think that engaging them, especially younger people, because they do want to kind of get responses back. And in the mobile phone, for the first time, we have a device that is both a content creation and dissemination device as well as a content receiving device. And so we ought to kind of participate in it. A lot of us have chats, comments on our websites, and most of the comments tend to be pretty horrible, actually. But the reason we have it is because it's fairly conclusively proven that those who actually comment are the most engaged audiences. So you do want to engage them. The idea that we would create all the content and we would give it to you is the one that needs to change, because readers are able to create content now, and you want to be in a conversation with them, not just in a giving them information mode. Great. If there are no questions, you'll all get to have coffee a little earlier. So thank you very much.